The air is heavy, thick, with a musty metallic scent. A distant wind whispers through broken windows, carrying secrets long buried. The camera slowly pans across a throne, empty, yet somehow charged with the weight of unseen. Imagine a life born under a shadow so deep it stains every breath, every heartbeat. Imagine a child whose very body defied nature, whose skull cradled not just a mind, but a lake of water, whose bones, fragile and strange, threatened to melt beneath the weight of their own existence. What would it be like to live encased in such a curse? Tonight, we journey into the life of a king unlike any other, an heir bound by bloodlines twisted with secrecy, by a heritage so fraught it left him both revered and feared. A king whose body became a living enigma, whose existence hovered at the fragile edge between awe and horror. This is the story of the inbred king, the one born with a skull full of water, the one whose bones could turn to liquid. A story that science struggles to explain, that history only dares whisper, and that legend has cloaked in shadows for centuries. By the end of this tale, you will not only see the shocking truth of his body, but feel the haunting reality of a life shaped by curses, by heredity, and by the dark corridors of power itself. Before we descend into these shadows, take a moment. If you're ready to explore the most chilling corners of history, click, like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Join the Cursed Chronicles family and let us guide you through a story you'll never forget. He was born into a lineage where the blood itself was a tapestry of repetition, a looping spiral of the same names, the same faces, generation after generation. In the grand halls of European royalty, alliances were cemented not just with treaties, but with rings, with marriages meant to preserve power, wealth, and the illusion of purity. Sons wed nieces, cousins married uncles, and the family tree bent and folded back upon itself until it resembled less a map of heritage and more a labyrinth of secrets, whispers, and unseen consequences. The king's ancestors were among the most infamous of these dynasties. Portraits show their faces pale and sculpted, eyes shadowed with the weight of expectation and the burden of heredity. Chroniclers wrote of their obsession with keeping power within the bloodline, but what they did not, or could not foresee, was how the body itself might betray the family's obsession. From his earliest days, the child displayed oddities that could not be ignored. His eyes, unnervingly large, seemed to watch with a gaze that understood far too much. His limbs were delicate, almost ethereal, bending in ways that made courtiers gasp. It was whispered that he could not endure the cold as others did, that his cries were unlike those of other children, more haunting, more urgent. The court physicians, trained in the rudiments of observation and superstition, noted a fragile frame, skin pallid, bones unnervingly soft, and a head already unnaturally large, bearing a strange fullness that no one could explain. The family tree itself reads like a cautionary tale etched in ink and sorrow. Cousins married cousins, uncles wed nieces, and the accumulation of shared genes left its mark in subtle but devastating ways. Every branch carried the memory of the one before, a repetition that made the extraordinary deformities of this child almost inevitable, yet no less tragic. The court whispers spoke of the child's oddness as though it were a portent, an omen of misfortune, while the family tried desperately to maintain the veneer of royal dignity. Even from birth, it was clear that he was not like other heirs. Accounts describe a body so fragile it seemed threatened by its own existence, yet a mind that flickered with awareness, absorbing the solemnity and cruelty of court life with piercing clarity. By the age of 5, he was already the subject of both fascination and fear, his presence a living testament to the hidden costs of generations of inbreeding. The physicians and scribes wrote in hushed tones of deformities that were as mysterious as they were disturbing, hinting at conditions that modern science would struggle to explain fully, but which were real enough to shape the trajectory of his life. It is within this intricate web of lineage, power, and repetition that his story begins to unfold. The world around him, opulent yet suffocating, mirrored the complexities of his own body. And as the shadows of history stretch across the corridors of his life, one question lingers: how much of his destiny was written in the stars, and how much was etched painfully into his very bones? If you find the hidden truths of royal bloodlines as haunting as we do, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, and comment where you are watching from. Let's uncover history's darkest secrets together. From the moment he first drew breath, the king's head was unlike any that had ever been seen. It was not merely large or misshapen in the way chroniclers of the era often exaggerated. It was, in the most literal sense, a vessel filled with fluid, a skull that seemed to cradle water where bone should have ruled with rigid certainty. Court physicians recoiled at the sight, their quills trembling as they tried to record what they could not fully understand. The skin over his crown stretched unnaturally, almost translucent in certain light, as if the fluid within reflected the very weight of his fragile life. Modern medicine might point to hydrocephalus, a condition in which cerebrospinal fluid accumulates within the ventricles of the brain, forcing the skull to expand under pressure. Other possibilities include severe cranial malformations, conditions where the bones of the skull fail to ossify properly, leaving a malleable, almost liquid-like structure to protect the soft tissue within. Historical autopsies of similarly afflicted children, rare as they are, describe the cranial vault as unusually thin, sometimes so delicate that even the slightest pressure could leave a permanent impression. Imagining this child moving through the gilded halls of his ancestral palace, one can almost feel the invisible weight he carried. Each step, each nod of the head, was a delicate negotiation with gravity and fluid. His every motion had to account for a brain floating within a fragile enclosure, a mind suspended in uncertainty. Court physicians insisted he avoid the jostling games of other children, forbade him from rough play, and prescribed endless hours of stillness, as if containment might protect both body and spirit from catastrophe. Contemporaneous sketches of his profile show the exaggeration of the era's artistic style. Yet beneath the embellishment, one can trace a truth both horrifying and magnificent. A child encased in a living chalice, a skull that seemed to contain not just water, but the very essence of fragility. Comparisons made with normal skulls illustrate the difference starkly. The typical rigid dome, replaced by something almost gelatinous, expanding and contracting with each subtle shift of the fluid within. The condition shaped not only his body, but the contours of his mind. Movement had to be measured. Thoughts, perhaps, became more deliberate, sharpened by the awareness of vulnerability that few others could comprehend. Sleep was likely restless, every jolt or tilt of the head a threat to the fragile equilibrium of liquid and bone. Even the simplest interactions carried the weight of his anomaly, casting a shadow over a childhood that would otherwise have been ordinary. Despite the extraordinary nature of his condition, the king survived, a living testament to the resilience of the human body, even under the most extreme and unnatural pressures of heredity and circumstance. And as we begin to trace the path of his life, it becomes clear that his skull, fragile and fluid, was only the beginning of the story, a prelude to the even darker mysteries that lay hidden in the bones beneath. If you are intrigued by the strange intersections of history and science, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, and comment where you're watching from so we can continue uncovering the hidden truths of the past together. Beneath the delicate crown of his head, his bones told a story even more disturbing. Unlike the rigid skeletons of ordinary men, his were said to soften, to yield under pressure, as if the very essence of solidity had abandoned them. Historical accounts, sparse and often whispered, describe limbs that bent unnaturally, ribs that seemed almost pliable, and joints that lacked the firmness necessary to bear the weight of even a child. Observers spoke in hushed tones of the king's gait, a careful, deliberate movement, each step a negotiation with bones that refused to obey the simple laws of nature. Modern medicine might point to severe forms of osteogenesis imperfecta or other rare metabolic bone disorders, conditions in which the skeleton fails to maintain its strength, leaving fragile tissue prone to deformation and fracture. In some autopsy reports from centuries later, skeletons with similar symptoms were noted to have bones so porous they resembled crumbling ivory. And yet, somehow, life had persisted within them. The very idea that a human being could survive with a body so precariously suspended between solidity and fluidity is almost unimaginable. Imagine the psychological weight of existing in such a form. Every movement was an act of precision, every gesture a careful calculation. Childhood play, the simplest of joys, was likely denied to him, replaced by an awareness that one misstep could shatter the fragile architecture of his body. The palace, with its echoing halls and polished stone floors, became both stage and prison, a space in which his skeletal fragility dictated every motion. Courtiers watched, part fascinated, part horrified, as this boy navigated a world built for those whose bones could bear the ordinary burdens of life. And yet, he endured. Through sheer resilience, through the astonishing adaptability of flesh and mind, he grew, a living paradox, both fragile and formidable, both a curiosity and a cautionary tale. His condition became legend, whispered not only for its rarity, but for the haunting image it conjured: a king whose bones could almost melt, a life perpetually teetering on the edge of dissolution. If the haunting reality of a body so extraordinary fascinates you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, and comment where you're watching from. Let's journey deeper into the shadows of history and uncover the full story behind the inbred king whose very bones defied nature. Life for the king was a careful choreography of survival. Every day, from the moment he awoke, required vigilance, as though the world itself were a threat to his fragile form. Courtiers and attendants moved around him like shadows, their presence both protective and suffocating, monitoring each step, each gesture, ensuring that no sudden movement would imperil the delicate balance of his body. He learned quickly the art of stillness, of measured motion, and even the simple act of sitting required attention, lest the bones beneath him yield in ways that might not be repaired. His diet was meticulously controlled, his environment tempered to prevent fatigue, to guard against the slow, invisible erosion of his skeletal integrity. Despite the constraints, the mind of the king remained alert, acutely aware of the world around him. He observed the intrigues of the court, the quiet manipulations of his relatives, and the unspoken hierarchies that governed palace life. Where others saw luxury and privilege, he perceived fragility and danger, a constant tension between the allure of power and the precariousness of his own existence. Even play, even education, became an exercise in ingenuity. Lessons were adapted, physical tasks simplified, yet he absorbed knowledge with a voracious curiosity, driven by both intellect and the haunting recognition of his own limitations. The fragility of his body shaped the depth of his perception, sharpening instincts and heightening awareness, creating a child who was both vulnerable and profoundly perceptive. In this controlled, almost surreal existence, the king's life unfolded like a delicate experiment. The boundaries between human endurance and anatomical anomaly blurred. Every day was a testament to resilience, to the silent negotiation between flesh, bone, and the unyielding expectations of lineage. As he grew, the mysteries of his body continued to draw both fear and fascination. Modern science, peering back through the fog of history, offers glimpses into what might have been at work. The skull, filled unnaturally with fluid, the fragile, almost pliable bones, all suggest the interplay of genetic inheritance and rare medical conditions. Hydrocephalus could account for the accumulation of cerebrospinal fluid within the brain, forcing the skull to expand under immense pressure. Osteogenesis imperfecta or other severe bone disorders might explain the weakness and flexibility of his skeleton, the way it seemed to almost liquefy under stress. Studies of similar cases in recent centuries reveal just how astonishing his survival truly was. Children born with comparable conditions often face profound physical limitations, Yet some adapt with extraordinary resilience, their minds sharpened by necessity as much as their bodies are constrained. It is likely that the king's intellect, his awareness of every motion, every breath, was honed by the constant need for caution, a mind perpetually alert, navigating a body on the brink of collapse. Historical records, sparse as they are, hint at physicians who attempted primitive interventions, ways to stabilize his health, but none could alter the fundamental truth of his inheritance. Each movement, each daily ritual required the careful negotiation of anatomy and gravity. His very life was a delicate equilibrium, a haunting dance between fragility and survival. Through this lens, his existence becomes more than a curiosity. It is a window into the extremes of human physiology and the profound consequences of generations of inbreeding. The intersection of history and science reveals a life at once tragic and remarkable, a testament to endurance against impossible odds. If you are captivated by the extraordinary resilience of this king and the hidden truths of history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, and comment where you're watching from. Together, we will continue to explore the darkest and most fascinating corners of the past. The king's legacy, however, extended far beyond the fragile contours of his body. Despite the limitations imposed by his condition, he ascended to power, a sovereign shaped as much by circumstance as by heredity. His reign was marked by an uneasy mix of reverence and fear. Courtiers and foreign dignitaries alike were drawn to the court by tales of his peculiar form, by the almost mythical fragility that seemed to hover over every decision he made. Artists and chroniclers attempted to capture him in portraits and manuscripts, yet their work often betrayed the impossibility of fully representing such an anomaly. Exaggeration was inevitable, but beneath the flourishes, one can glimpse the truth. A ruler whose physical vulnerability amplified the weight of his authority, whose very presence reminded all who encountered him of the strange interplay between power and human limitation. Legends grew around his figure, intertwining fact and myth. Stories of his bones softening, of his skull swelling with fluid, became parables whispered in royal courts and distant villages alike. Some saw in him a cautionary tale, a living warning of the consequences of insular lineage and the obsession with preserving bloodlines. Others perceived a figure of fascination, a spectral monarch who seemed to straddle the boundary between human and otherworldly, corporeal and almost liquid. In the echoes of history, his reign remains a complex tapestry of fear, curiosity, and awe, a life in which the extraordinary nature of his body was inseparable from the story of his rule. Every decision, every public appearance carried the weight not only of governance, but of a corporeal enigma that history has yet to fully unravel. And yet, even as the chronicles recorded his reign, shadows of speculation and mystery clung to his story like a second skin. Whispers circulated in hushed corridors of the palace. Was his condition purely the result of heredity, or did darker forces play a part? Some claimed that curses, long whispered in the secret rites of the court, had touched him before he drew his first breath. Others suggested that his anomalies were divine punishments, warnings etched into flesh and bone for sins of the past. Scholars and physicians of the time could offer only limited insight. Their instruments were crude, their understanding of genetics non-existent. They recorded, observed, and theorized, yet every explanation seemed to fall short, leaving room for legend to flourish. Even centuries later, modern analysis can only partially reconstruct the intricate dance between nature and nurture that produced such a singular being. The boundaries between myth and reality blur in his story, and it is precisely that uncertainty, the haunting question of what is fact and what is imagination, that continues to captivate those who encounter his tale. In the quiet corners of history, where the pages are yellowed and the ink faded, his story lingers as a dark, psychological narrative, a reminder that human life is as fragile as it is resilient, and that the deepest mysteries often lie not in events themselves, but in the minds of those who witness them. If these shadows of history intrigue you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, and comment where you're watching from. Join us as we continue to uncover the most haunting and remarkable stories ever recorded. As the years passed, the inbred king became both legend and enigma. His life, suspended between fragility and power, left a mark that history could neither fully explain nor ignore. He ruled, he endured, and he fascinated, a living paradox whose very existence challenged the limits of the human body and the depths of human curiosity. The whispers of his condition, skull filled with water, bones that softened like wax, echoed long after his death, inspiring awe, fear, and relentless fascination in those who sought to understand him. Even today, historians, scientists, and storytellers return to his tale, drawn by the haunting intersection of heredity, anatomy, and human resilience. His life is a reminder that history is not only the story of events and dates, but of the fragile, often tragic human forms that carried them into the world. It is a story of endurance against the impossible, of a body and mind shaped by forces beyond comprehension, and of a legacy that continues to ripple through the corridors of time. And now, as you sit in the quiet of your own world, having journeyed through the shadows of his existence, we invite you to become part of the Cursed Chronicles family. Like this video if the story moved you, subscribe to uncover more of history's darkest secrets, and comment below where you're watching from. Let your voice join the echoes of those who seek the truths hidden in the shadows of the past.